The spooky gimmick has become a staple in wrestling over the years. That said, most of these gimmicks have been played by the men. Yes, whether it be The Undertaker, Bray Wyatt, or even Kevin Sullivan, the freakiest of characters are often portrayed by the guys. But what about the women? After all, they've had their fair share of scary gimmicks over the years too, and it's those people we're going to be looking at right now, starting with Alexa Bliss. That's right, we mentioned Bray Wyatt a moment ago as being one of the more memorable examples of a spooky character in wrestling, but he wasn't the only part of that act. No, during the days where he was playing the role of the Fiend, you could often tell he was coming on account of his herald announcing his arrival. And that herald was portrayed by none other than Alexa Bliss in her creepy incarnation. Sure, for years prior to that, there had been nothing scary about Alexa at all, as her character was far more Mean Girls than it was Halloween. But this all changed in 2020 when she began being courted by Bray. And when that happened, there was a change in the Columbus native's personality. Now, rather than being her usual self, she'd start falling into trances in the middle of matches, all before then acting in a way which made it seem like she was being possessed by the Fiend. And after that, Alexa would fully buy into the cult of Wyatt as she started changing up her ring gear and wearing more dramatic makeup every time she came out to the ring. At this point, even her friends like Nikki Cross could no longer reach her. No, the only person who could get through to the 5-time former women's champion was her leader, and this made her an intimidating person to go up against. Hell, even when Bray left WWE for a while, Alexa would continue on with her spooky playground character, with her at this point literally turning the ring into a playground as her swing became a part of the scenery. And while she has moved away from this gimmick in 2025, she still keeps aspects of it in the form of her spooky doll, Lily. So really, you could say this has been the biggest part of Bliss's career so far, and the part which most fans will remember her for in years to come. But Alexa Bliss isn't the only current woman on the WWE roster who's been playing a spooky gimmick which has some connection to Bray Wyatt. No, the exact same thing could be said about our next subject too, someone we mentioned a moment ago in fact, Nikki Cross. Of course, you could argue that Nikki Cross has been playing spooky gimmicks a lot longer than her association with Bray Wyatt. In fact, as early as 2016 when she first joined WWE, she was the lone female member of Sanity. And in her role within Sanity, she was very much the lunatic, the craziest of a crazy bunch. That said, as time went on and Sanity went the way of the dodo, the Glasgow native decided to mellow out a little, particularly when she became almost a superhero. But this wouldn't be the way things went for her forever. No, after briefly starting a gimmick once Triple H took over booking where she stood and blankly stared into space in the middle of matches, Nikki took a short sabbatical from WWE. And when she returned again, things would be very different for her. Why was that? Well, this was the point she became a member of the Wyatt Six, the group led by Bo Dallas, which served as a tribute to his by then deceased brother. Yes, among the ranks of the Wyatt Six, there would be Dallas in the role of Uncle Howdy, Eric Rowan playing the part of Rambling Rabbit, Dexter Loomis giving us his portrayal of Mercy the Buzzard, and Joe Gacy showing us what he could do as Huskus. And then there was the lone female member, Abby the Witch, a character portrayed by Nikki Cross. Needless to say then, ever since the heel stable began, Cross has been at her spookiest yet, with her now mostly standing at ringside during her teammates' tag team title defenses and helping to intimidate their opponents. Will she ever get another big singles run in the women's division as Abby the Witch, possibly going all the way to the world title again in the process? That remains to be seen. And she's not the only woman working for a North American promotion who currently has this. No, if we head over to All Elite Wrestling for a moment, we'll find another similar situation playing out with our next subject, Julia Hart. Now, Julia Hart wasn't always someone who had a scary character. No, early on during her AEW run, she was portrayed in a far different way, a lot more similar to the early days of Alexa Bliss. And that's because it was here that she was the cheerleader third member of the Varsity Blondes alongside Brian Pillman Jr. and Griff Garrison. Of course, this made sense at the time though, as Julia had been a cheerleader in school. That said, it didn't represent the way she wanted to be portrayed on screen long term. No, the Minnesotan had different plans for herself going forward, and this was why in late 2021, she approached the House of Black backstage and inquired about joining their stable. Needless to say then, once they saw her commitment to what would be this new role following her getting misted by Malachi Black, the then trio made up of Black, Brody King, and Buddy Matthews invited the rookie on board and rechristened her as the Princess of the Black Throne. And that would represent the final piece of the puzzle falling into place for Hart as it turned out, because almost immediately after going dark, she started getting a lot more over with fans, to the point that come Full Gear in November of 2023, she'd be winning the TBS title from Chris Statlander, an incredible achievement when you consider she'd only just turned 21 mere weeks before this happened. Where has she gone since then? Well, while she's since lost her gold to Mercedes Moné, Giulia remains one of the more focused upon acts in the AEW mid-card. So much so that she'll still make pay-per-view appearances on a semi-regular basis, all while she continues to get better in the ring with each passing week. Would this have happened if she'd never gone spooky? Probably not, as it's that gimmick which first got her over with fans to any significant degree. And it's that gimmick which continues to see her stand out today. So far as she come, in fact, now in 2025, rather than being the third in a stable of lower card wrestlers, she's the leader of her own faction, the Triangle of Madness, alongside the Toxic Spider Thekla and our next entry, Sky Blue. Yes, Sky Blue is another wrestler who wasn't always scary in her nature. No, only a couple of years ago, in fact, when the 26-year-old was first getting her start in AEW, she was much different in that she was portrayed as more of a regular, relatable person, someone who was more smiles and sunshine than she was dark clouds and demons. As we now know, though, this would eventually change for her, and the change happened when she first started aligning herself on screen with Giulia Hart in 2023. No, Sky never became a member of the House of Black back then, but she did form a sort of satellite tag team with Hart, and this understandably saw her start to take on a much more gothic personality. Really, the days of coming out to the ring clad in the Chicago Stars while she waved for the audience was gone by then, and in their place was a lot of dark makeup, a moody vibe, and a willingness to do whatever it took to get a victory, whether that meant cheating or not. How has this helped Blue's career? Well, while she's still a ways off at being at a world title level or anything, she's now got a regular spot on Dynamite and Collision, something she didn't have before. So it's hard to consider her allegiance with Giulia Hart and subsequent turn to the spookier side of wrestling to be anything less than a success. But let's move away from AEW and WWE for a moment and over to TNA instead, another promotion which is no stranger to scary female gimmicks. Hell, they might have more than anyone else when you sit and break it all down, with one of the most prominent of these being our next subject, the one, the only, Rosemary. That's right, Rosemary has certainly made a name for herself as one of the freakier female characters in the entire industry. Come on now, everyone who's an Impact fan knows how great she was as part of Decay alongside Abyss and Crazy Steve, as this was the group which allowed her to fully lean into her darker side. What did this dark side involve? Well, aside from a lot of spooky makeup, it was just the general intimidation factor of a woman who felt like she had no limits to what she was willing to do in the ring. Yes, whether it be her early feuds with the likes of Rebby Hardy, her propensity for spraying the dreaded mist in her opponents' faces in general, or her later involvement in the truly bizarre Underworld angle, which involved Allie, Taya Valkyrie, and Su Yung, Rosemary has always been at the forefront of TNA's scarier side. Understandably then, this has led to much title success for the Winnipeg native over the years, with her not only being a former 4-time Knockouts Tag Team Champion, but also a 1-time Knockouts World Champion as well. And whenever she's had a chance to take a break from scaring the roster of Impact with her spooky nature, she's been able to make excursions to other places too. Places like Deadlock Pro Wrestling, AAA, and even a brief cameo appearance on NXT as a part of that brand's current working relationship with TNA. The only question left at this point then is, will this working relationship ever see her go over to WWE full-time, something she's yet to do throughout her lengthy career? We guess we'll just have to wait and see if that happens. One person we won't have to ask this question of, however, is our next subject, someone who, well, she's all but retired now, has had runs in both TNA and WWE, as well as AEW and Ring of Honor. That's right, it's time for us to talk about a true scary lady of the world, Awesome Kong. Now, what makes Awesome Kong scary isn't a spooky gimmick, though she did briefly have one of those in the Nightmare Collective stable which existed during the early days of AEW. No, for the vast majority of her career, what's made her scary is the fact that she's just that intimidating of a presence. Not the person behind the gimmick, of course. No, by all accounts, Kia Stevens is one of the nicer people in the industry. But whenever she transforms into Awesome Kong, the mood suddenly changes. It doesn't matter if we're talking about that run in AEW, her short time spent in WWE as Karma, or perhaps her most memorable stretch in TNA as one of the highlights of their Knockouts division. Kong has always had that feeling of being a final boss, someone who could scare her opponents half to death purely based on the fact that they knew that, once the bell rang, she was going to eat them alive. Hell, there's a reason she's a 2-time Knockouts champion, just as there's a reason she's one of only 4 women who've ever entered the Men's Royal Rumble alongside Chyna, Beth Phoenix, and Nia Jax. Honestly, the only negative thing we can say about Awesome Kong is that we wish she'd come around just a little bit later, as if she'd been active in the modern day where things are much better for women's wrestling, she could have risen even higher and become an even bigger star. But what about Japan? Don't they have their own scary female force? Why, yes they do, none other than the legendary Bull Nakano. That's right, like with Awesome Kong, Bull Nakano was not necessarily someone who tried to intimidate her opponents with a spooky gimmick or anything. No, well, she did have that cool face paint and that hairstyle which made her look like the Bride of Frankenstein. What made her stand out as a scary character was more the fact that she was just a beast whenever the bell rang. Seriously, whenever she was on the card in her native country for All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling, you could always count on her to deliver a beatdown for the ages. Of course, her most well-known era came during the mid-90s. This was her chief WWF run, where she became a chief rival to Alexa Bliss as the two did battle over that promotion's women's championship. Such a big impact would she make here, in fact, with her freaky gimmick that despite only being on the roster for around a year, Nakano would end up getting inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame years later in 2024. Does this mean she's still carrying on with that scary gimmick in the present day? No, quite the opposite, as in 2025, Bull Nakano has retired from the ring and become a pro golfer instead. So with that in mind, let's move away from her for now and over to another scary female who first rose to prominence during the 80s as well, one who was entirely based in America, a true crazy woman any Golden Era fan will be familiar with in Sherry Martel. Now again, we should point out here that this crazy woman character was very much a character, as in real life, Sherry Martel was well known for her kind nature. Once it came time to go through the curtain, however, things were very different. And that was because when the lights went on, she transformed into Sensational Sherry, one of the wilder gimmicks in an era filled with cartoon gimmicks. What were you likely to see if you tuned into TV for her? Well, you were going to get a cackling villain, someone who became a figure of fear to every kid watching at the time, and that made her one of the more memorable performers of her era. It didn't matter if she was managing the Macho Man, standing in the corner of Shawn Michaels, or tethering herself to Ted DiBiase, Sensational Sherry always had a prime role on WWF television throughout the 80s and early 90s. And she was always one of the freakier performers on display while she was doing this. But unlike many other valets of the era, when it came time to get physical, she was more than capable of doing that too, as Sherry was a very accomplished wrestler in her own right. Yes, prior to ever making it to WWF, the Alabama native had been one of the biggest women's stars in Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association, with this giving her a sense of legitimacy which many others around her didn't have. And that legitimacy would help her thrive way beyond her time in WWF too, as once that run came to an end, she'd have another memorable one in World Championship Wrestling between 1994 and 1997, where she used her scary antics to help get acts like Harlem Heat to the next level. Sadly though, with her passing away in 2007, there's no chance we'll be seeing Sherry Martel in a ring again anytime soon. And the same could be said for our next subject, a peer of Sherry's who had arguably an even freakier character, and who has also since left us, the woman best known to the world as Luna Vashan. Now, all you need to do is take one look at Luna Vashan, and you'll know exactly why she's been included in today's video. Come on now, that makeup, that hairstyle, those facial expressions. If there ever was an attempt at turning a female performer into a horror movie villain in wrestling, then this was it. And that's pretty impressive because prior to turning into the character she became, Gertrude Vashan was considered to be something of an all-American sweetheart. But then something happened. In 1985, Gertrude would be involved in an angle where she was corrupted by Kevin Sullivan and brought into his Army of Darkness stable. And with that, a whole new incarnation of the Atlanta native was born as she transformed into Luna, a maniacal lunatic who loved nothing more than to cause pain and suffering to any babyfaces who were anywhere near her at any given time. Needless to say then, this quickly turned the niece of the legendary Mad Dog Vashan into a big name in her own right, so much so that by time 1993 came around, she'd be getting brought into WWF to serve as the on-screen squeeze for Bam Bam Bigelow. But that wasn't all she was doing. No, like with Sensational Sherry, Luna Vashan could also go in the ring, and this meant she'd lock horns with people like Alexa Bliss during her first run there too, coming close to becoming WWF Women's Champion a number of times in the process. In the end though, she'd never win this belt. No, even during her second run in WWF between 1997 and 2000, Luna would find that belt to be out of her reach. Still though, at least she remained in a prominent spot on the card, as her theatrical nightmarish villainess was the perfect counterpoint to more buxom babyfaces like Sable. That's right, even now in 2025, when we talk about great heels of women's wrestling, Vashan is right up there amongst the top, and a big part of the reason for that is because she was so perfectly able to play that spooky character. But let's move away from a prior era for now and back to something closer to the modern day again, someone who currently wrestles as part of the NXT brand in a slightly more comedic gimmick. That said, before she was Wendy Chu, she was portraying our next subject, Mei Ying. That's right, the current version of Wendy Chu does have dark elements to her, but this isn't her spookiest character. If you want to see something which was scarier, then you need to go back to the initial gimmick she had when she first joined WWE full-time in 2020, as this was when we were all introduced to the mysterious Mei Ying. Who was Mei Ying? Well, she was the leader of the Tian Sha stable, a stable which also included performers like Xia Li and Boa. Unlike them though, Ying was very clearly the leader of that whole operation. And the reason for that was because she appeared to have some kind of mystical powers. Obviously then, this was very spooky by design and the kind of thing you might have found in an 80s movie. And it worked for Karen Q for a little while at least, because while she didn't really have much in the way of matches while in this incarnation, she had an aura to her which made her feel like a final boss. Sadly though, for one reason or another, the Mei Ying character would never get to reach its final form, as come late 2021 it would be dropped, with it seemingly being felt by someone in creative that it just wasn't hitting the way they'd hoped it might. And that's what led to the Wendy Chu character we have today. Of course, not every spooky female in wrestling needs to be supernatural though. No, if we look at our next subject, we find someone which was somewhat more based in reality. Who are we talking about this time? Who else but Shelly Martinez, the woman known back then as Ariel. Now we say somewhat more based in reality here because while Ariel was never portrayed as a mythical figure, she was kind of a vampire. Yes, it seems her and her main squeeze at the time, Kevin Thorne, weren't supposed to be literal vampires, just people who were into the culture, but still it was vampire adjacent at best. Regardless, Ariel definitely fell into the character of scary female as far as her WWE gimmick was concerned. The only problem was Ariel's presentation in WWE between 2006 and 2007, in fact, was that rather than her being on Raw or SmackDown where more people could see her, she was on the WWE CW brand. And this means much of her run has gone forgotten today, but it shouldn't be because there was plenty of entertaining stuff in there as she used her vampiric ways to get the better of opponents like Francine and Kelly, all while she was also helping Kevin Thorne to pick up wins too. Hell, even when she left WWE, the Californian was able to continue on in wrestling when she joined TNA and started going by her real name of Shelly Martinez. Sure, she wouldn't be portrayed as a vampire anymore at this point, but there were still gothic leanings to what she was doing. And that helped to get her over with the Nashville faithful as she became a key member of LAX for a while. One spooky woman in wrestling who never performed for TNA though would be our next subject because she was already retired by that point. Yes, it's time for us to flash back through the decades again, back to the mid-80s, where we'll find the freaky antics of the often forgotten Mad Maxine. Don't remember Mad Maxine? We understand why, as she's not someone who's spoken about a lot today, and that's particularly because her career inside the squared circle was so short. That's right, rather than be someone who, like others we've looked at today, lasted for decades, Janine Moisette's time in the ring was all of a year long. During that year, however, she certainly made as much of an impact as she could because, with her mohawk hairstyle and leather biker gear, she stood out a lot, so much so that even WWF would briefly have her work for them. Sure, this was a short run and not one which had many notable moments, but Mad Maxine was there in 1985, right at the peak years of that company's golden era. Hell, such a personality was Maxine here, she was even going to be included as a character in Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling Saturday morning cartoon at one point. Sadly though, before that could happen, she'd leave WWF behind and instead head over to places like Championship Wrestling from Florida and the Universal Wrestling Association, where she'd run out the clock on what remained of her career. Why did the German native leave WWF before she could become a cartoon superstar? Well, like with many women during that time period, she had a lot of issues with her then manager, the Fabulous Moolah. So it was then that, like that, Mad Maxine came to an end as by 1986, she'd be retired from the industry altogether. But even today, her presence is still felt in some way in the look of wrestlers like Rhea Ripley. So it's not like her mark hasn't been left. And the same could be said about all of the other women we've looked at today, because they all helped to build the framework for what a scary female character could be in wrestling.